life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come.
Hey, welcome everyone to our next episode of the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm Justin Bowling.
And I'm Brooke Atchley, and we have my husband with us tonight, the Reverend Aaron Atchley as well. So welcome.
Welcome, Aaron.
He is a pastor down in Gray, Tennessee. So airport kids are PK'd squared.
Good stuff. All right. So our topic tonight is we are going to talk about controversies in, secular media or the culture at large that kind of gets, outrage culture with Christians. So I think Brooke had the idea last week to do this. So we're going to run through a bunch of different movies, and I have some bands as well, so we might touch on those. So Brooke, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. What got me thinking about this was talking with my college-age daughter and some of her roommates who had her roommates had never seen any of the movies or read any of the Harry Potter books because of their parents' objection at the time to the literature. So, and Aaron was a full-time youth director, and I was helping him when the Harry Potter movies came out, or the books came out. And so we kind of lived through some of that as mentors to youth, if you will. So I just thought it might be a good thing for us to touch on.
Yep. I agree. I believe there's plenty of things that we can talk about that outrages Christians. So go ahead, Bowen.
I was going to ask, what were the most common objections you really heard people bring up?
People were real concerned because of the witchcraft. They were afraid that their children were going to be lured into the occult, if you will. They were going to want to be witches or wizards. At the time, kids were running around and casting spells with their little fake wands, and there was a lot of concern that they were opening their souls to be taken over by the occult. So, there was movements to have the books banned from schools, and, there was this huge debate. I mean, I don't know if you all remember James Dobson, Focus on the Family, but there was it kind of kicked off the culture war, if you will, about what was appropriate for Christians to read outside of Christian literature. And so there was just lots of debate back and forth. And even in our own youth group, we had families who read it kind of together. We were one of those families with our kids. I mean, I have read all 7 Harry Potter novels out loud to my children. It takes forever. And then there were some who just didn't want to have anything to do with it and were kind of appalled, that we would do that with our own family. So it was just an interesting time.
Wow. Yeah. I seem to have missed that entirely when I was growing up. I wasn't into Harry Potter. I didn't really like to read when I was growing up. So it didn't attract me to want to read. I did watch the first movie when it came out with my aunt and uncle, but it didn't appeal to me for some reason. Like, I guess I wasn't a nerd until I became an adult. And that's when I became a nerd. So,
you grew up and became a nerd? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I did. I grew up and became a kid. So
Benjamin Button over here.
Yeah. So I definitely missed the Harry Potter craze. But I have since watched all the movies, at least. I have not read any of the books. Watched all the movies. Huh?
The books are better.
Oh, that's always
Way
the case.
better.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I just haven't had time to dedicate to reading all those books. I mean, I guess I have had time. It's just an excuse to not read them. But yeah, so I missed that. So I don't know that I have much input here. Other than the movies are good. I mean, I think Half-Blood Prince might be my favorite.
Yeah, we could debate which ones are best.
Mm.
You know, I mean, some of the storytelling,
mixed.
the effects definitely get better as the movies go along.
Mhm.
And I just think it's interesting how sometimes, and I truly believe that what we listen to, what we watch, affects who we are and affects our relationship with God. I think there are some things there that do that, but it's always struck me how, as Christians, sometimes we're so quick to blast, if you will, secular media. And of course, now doing what I do now, I really kind of see sometimes how that keeps a hedge between believers and non-believers, if you will.
Yeah.
Did you have a common tactic that you kind of use to try to? Well, I mean, you mentioned that you read all the books aloud to your kids, so I'm assuming you don't have personally a whole lot of issues with it. But did you have a common response to people who did have those concerns when they brought them to you, like to try to alleviate them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about how that it was totally fiction, right? And
Mhm.
J.K. Rowling, the author, talked about that. I mean, she was pretty open, even during the pushback, that she had no hidden agenda. She wasn't trying to coerce children to become witches and wizards. But we talked a lot about being able to relate to people who outside of the church and how it ostracized the children. You know, if the teacher was reading that book, trying to instill a love of reading to the classroom, and they were having to be excused, how that would maybe make that child feel about the church, and how others would view them. You know, I think with our own kids and with the youth and other folks, we talked about, discernment, like having to understand that this was fiction, and acknowledging that there is such a thing as the occult. And what does that look like? I mean, it really opened up conversation, because in Harry Potter, you have good wizards and witches, and you have bad wizards and witches. And,
They celebrate Christmas too.
Right, they
Yeah.
do. And so I thought it was interesting that after the whole series was done, one of the things that J.K. Rowling talked about was that she was shocked that people didn't see some of the Christian themes that she thought were very evident in the book. But I thought, and we used it with their kids as just kind of a launching point to talk about different people's beliefs and different worldviews. It opened up the idea to talk about a Christian worldview when our kids were tiny and little. So I think maybe sometimes it's about how you approach it instead of just being so cut and dry.
Yeah, I do wonder how consistent Christians are with this too. It seems like we can go off on a rail on one thing, but then be approving of something else that's really related. So what comes to mind is Wizard of Oz. I would imagine all Christians love that movie, but there's witches in that movie. There's that dark imagery in that movie, and I don't know that anybody can ever complain about it. At least I never heard of it. If they did, Bewitched would be another one. I would bet that most Christians watch that show. Again, it's not consistent.
Lord of the Rings
Mm-hmm.
trilogy. You have a lot of that same kind of thought, and that's a very Christian.
Tolkien's very
things,
outspoken Christian.
Yeah, but you still have wizards, and you have, Gandalf casting spells, and there doesn't seem to be a huge pushback against that.
Right.
A lot of what I had heard growing up was kind of what you said too, like the spells specifically in Harry Potter, that somebody would say, oh, that's a real spell, from some witch's manual or something, which is, kind of funny when you look at the actual words that they use for something like, Wingardium Leviosa is like just fly or something like that. That is what it's translated to. It's literally just like Latin for fly, or it's, nonsense or some kind of nonsense like abracadabra type thing. And I think that's actually a pretty decent comparison I remember hearing a lot of people make, is like, if you view it as fiction and view it as, fun, and can get people to realize that, it's not really much different than a magic show or somebody doing a magic trick. You're not really, if you say abracadabra when you pull a card out of a deck, you're not like pretending to summon demons or actually summoning demons or something like that. And if you can view these fantasy novels and things like that a similar way, then there's not really much harm in it. And I'm a big fantasy nerd myself, so I definitely would.
Hey, I've
advocate for
also
that.
read all the Aragon series out loud a couple times. So I mean, dragons and stuff galore. I don't know. I did a lot of reading out loud. Gracious day.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so it's almost the same thing, except you have to put in a lot more work. I hit the play button and you.
You were the play button.
I was the play button.
Yeah.
Voices and all, all the characters had voices. So have you read the Aragon series?
I have not. No.
It's a good one.
Still worth reading, even for a 30-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. In fact, I read them first and then decided that Abby would really like them and read them to her.
Okay.
So, yeah, they're fun. Easy to
So one of the things, I actually did not put this on the list, but it just came to mind, and I really want to talk about it, so I'm going to bring it up. This is completely relevant to when I was growing up and what was controversial that hit me personally, and that was the mid to, or I guess the late 90s wrestling era. I was a huge wrestling fan in WWE, WWF at the time, and they were just riddled with controversy. And like, there was a lot of times that Mom would even try to get me to stop watching, and I would sneak and watch it anyway, so she kind of gave up. But one of the things that was controversial was they had there was a character called The Undertaker, and in the 90s, in the late 90s, he started what was called the Ministry of Darkness, and it was literally a cult. It was literally a cult. And, like, so I guess I can see why there was controversy in Christian circles for that. But at the same time, like, looking back on it, I've watched replays of it. I'm not offended at all with this. Like, to me, it's art. So one example is there was another character, the manager of the Undertaker. His name was Paul Bearer, and in real life he was a preacher, but in wrestling he was, the manager of this Lord of Darkness in the occult. And I was like, well, that's interesting that a preacher would actively want to be involved in something that's completely opposite. But it makes sense, though, if you think about it. If you're an actor, you probably want to play something that you're completely opposite of. I know I would. Mm-hmm. Like, I think if I was going to be, in the Marvel movies, I'd want to be a villain. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if anybody watched wrestling during that era.
I did. I don't think quite as much as you, from what I've heard you say. But
yeah, I watched it up until 2012, 2013. That's when I stopped watching. So I was a pretty big fan.
Yeah, I really wasn't. I mean, lots of folks were into wrestling. I think that was college years for me. I'm older.
Mm. Yeah.
Maybe one thing we might want to, because I think we're kind of making an assumption that we can how to discuss these things, but maybe one thing we need to kind of get to is there a framework that we should be using to kind of judge whether these things are okay or not, and what is
how do we determine if it's okay or not?
Yeah.
Because
I would assume that is everything okay? Are there some things that aren't okay? And then how do we determine those? Is there any guidance in scripture? And I think the answer is yes, but.
I think you're right. I think it applies to music as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the line? As followers of Christ, are we only supposed to do sacred stuff? I don't think so. I think Paul is a great example of that.
Yes.
He's constantly using secular references to connect with folks and get people to understand the nature of God by secular references. And we can't do that if we seclude ourselves or just kind of corner ourselves into sacred music all the time. We laugh so much because, you know, as Methodist pastors, we move from community to community. And with kids, there was always this kind of period of time where the kids were getting to know us, like kids, our kids' friends. And one time we were listening to country music, and one of the kids that came over was just surprised. And what she told us is she thought that all preachers just listened to church music. That's all we listened to. You know, no.
Only listen to the Gregorian chant on repeat.
Fun fact, the Gregorian chant was used as part of the Undertaker's entrance on many different theme songs. Yep, there you go.
Well, fun fact, organs came into the church because they were the instrument of the bar, and they were trying to attract people outside the church. So what they do, they brought the instruments that people were used to. You know, Many of our so-called hymns now were bar tunes, just with different words to them. So back to your story, or your question, Bowling. What is our framework? When is it?
And I think you hit the right person, unsurprisingly. But Paul, I think, wrote quite a bit about things like this. You know, and was it 1 Corinthians 10? He talks about kind of the believer's freedom. He says something to the effect of like, but you may say that all things are permissible for me, but are all things actually good? So he seems to be saying, like, you know, we should treat it like, is this beneficial for us? And then he talks again in Romans 14 about something to the effect of, you know, like some people may be able to eat this certain food or eat other things like that, and you shouldn't judge them. Or, you know, maybe some people can eat that. And so I think that's kind of how we can approach these too. Is for maybe somebody who watches The Undertaker or whatever might have took it a little too far. We shouldn't discount those concerns or make fun of them or whatever if that's something that could take them too far, because we can do that on pretty much anything.
Yeah.
But if somebody's able to do that and is able to see it for what it is, as fiction or as art, as like you said, then, you know, as long as they can use it for good and use it for the glory of God somehow, then I don't see how you could say there's any problem with that. But that's not a, you know, one size fit all answer. It's a very wishy-washy, I guess, pastoral answer, if you would. But it's, I think that's kind of the answers we're called to in a lot of situations.
So I think personally for me, where I draw the line in media, if you will, whether it's whatever form, really is about how God is portrayed, I think, and how are people portrayed. So any kind of medium that objectifies women, I have a really hard time with. Because I think it is against scripture. So certain types of music, it's not even a type of music, it really is what the lyrics are about. Racist. So that's a big deal for me personally. But I will say this, I have found that certain music makes me more anxious than other music. And so makes me a little angrier sometimes, and y'all do not want to see me angry. It's not pleasant. So I do think sometimes we have to be kind of attuned to who we are and how we are affected by the different types of media. Thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I know Bowling and I've had discussions before where we basically talked about, like, is sin black and white? Like, if something is a sin to me, would that same sin be a sin to Bowling? And if, let's say that I was an alcoholic and then I go to a bar and partake in alcohol, that may be a sin for me because I know my past. Whereas if Bowling does it casually, is that a sin for him? You know, I would say no. So, you know, I think it's one of those things. It's a complex issue, and it's a personal issue for each person. We can't just simplify what is sin and what is, you know, right for someone and what's wrong for someone. It should be up to their conscience.
So here's an interesting take on this conversation, I think. So I think we would all agree that pornography, visual pornography, is bad. right? It's sinful. I mean, I don't really care how you cut it.
It is.
It's poison for our brain.
Yep.
So taking a step further, what about the romance novels that women read? Because we know that statistics prove that men participate in visual pornography more than women. But our romance novel, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So that's something that I struggled with myself early on, and realized that was so the things that were unfair about pornography is kind of unfair about some of those romance novels too. I do think there are degrees of romance novels, if you will. But I think it's along the same lines, so I don't particularly appreciate romance novels anymore. But there was a time that was my go-to need to calm down, read something mindless before bed.
Going with romance novels, even my elderly Christian grandmother, that was one of her like go-tos. Like she's got an entire cabinet full of romance novels, older ones, of course, but still, that's just in the same line, right? And I don't know that people see it as that, but I at least think there's some objectification of women and different things in those. I know 50 Shades of Grey was huge controversy in the Christian circles, but I know plenty of Christians, even, some of my family, that wouldn't watch that movie. I never watched it. I never had the desire to watch that movie, but I'm also not saying that they shouldn't have watched it. Like it's on them. It's on their conscience to watch it. But, I think there is some gray area there, some 50 Shades there.
I knew it. Yep.
Oh, yeah, you walked into that one. That was bad. That was bad. But, it's interesting that you brought that up, because that's really the book and the movie that really started that thought process for me. Was, was it okay for me to read, incredibly sexy literature? And what was the difference from watching that on the television screen than reading it? And where was that line for me? So because I thought it put me in a frame of mind that was unfair to my marriage. And God called me to be married to this man here. And anything that was getting in the way of that would then be sinful.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And I think that's a good point too, because it's easy, to criticize, the Puritan way of looking at it, to where, everything that could be controversial is just not allowed. That way there's no near occasions of sin possible at all, which, I mean, you can't really do that, but even taking that into account, that would be the goal. And you can go to the opposite extreme and look at everything's permissible, and then not see any valid criticisms of anything like that. Yeah. And like, there's definitely lots of, and I think I've experienced that myself. Like I grew up in a lot of situations where people were against all, these rock people were all Satanists. You shouldn't listen to them. I mean, not quite that. I'm
not in Satan service.
Yeah. But like don't listen to these, rock artists who have sold their soul to Satan and all this stuff, which is everybody apparently. But, and then you can go from that and then go to the opposite, to where like, it's easy to kind of just dismiss any criticism of that and not take it seriously, because that's just people being, puritanical. And I don't think that's right either. Like there's a lot of valid criticisms that they kind of start their trek down that road from, but that we should take to heart and really look at it. And like you said, see if it is interfering in what God has called us to do, whether it's marriage, whether it's, our vocation or whatever it is.
Yeah. I concur.
I think it brings us back to that whole legalistic argument, right?
Yep.
And Jesus warns us over and over and over again about not being legalistic. I do think there are some hard and fast parameters that we, have on that God has said, these are bad for you. These are outside of my plan for you. And it's outside of my will. But there's a lot of gray in there, if you will. And And we've got to be really careful that we don't stake a claim on some of the gray area and we forget about the relationship that's being built.
Right.
Yes.
And I think, like what you're saying with the gray, like I like defining that with something like,
50 Shades.
God, oh my gosh. God knows like what our intent towards something is. So like there's the some verse in I think Jeremiah that a lot Jeremiah chapter 10 that a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses like to use to say that Christmas trees can't be used. And it's something to the effect of, they talks about them cutting out a tree of the forest and they're shaping it and they're hanging silver and gold from it, and then therefore Christmas trees are bad. But what that chapter is about is obviously people making an idol out of something and worshiping it. And that's not saying that like there's a black and white there that making an idol is wrong. You can't have any other gods before God. But it's not, the black and white isn't about the tree itself type thing. So like the material that we make our idols out of don't always have to be an idol, because all things were created by God for Him, and they can be used for Him, but they can also be used for idols. And that's kind of the what's the word deciding factor, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's exactly it. So one of the other big shows that I think had some outrage when it was going was Game of Thrones. And I know myself and Bowling, did you watch any of the seasons? I know you read the books.
Not really. I read the books.
Yeah. But I mean, me and a bunch of our friends, we not only watched the show, we had a fantasy football draft of the show. Like we were that into the show, but we were actually getting blowback from other Christian friends of ours saying, you should not be watching this show, and it was really specifically over nudity. And like we had many debates, many discussions on how you can watch a show that has nudity and it not be sinful. And, I always came down on the line that if it's an art form and there's a story and there's, a hopeful ending, and, there's other aspects of the show that's not just nudity. It's not just about nudity. Like nudity is a very small part of this show. Then I can get past it.
I want to push back on hopeful ending there. I'm not sure if you were
No,
watching the same show.
Okay. It was. I was hopeful that there would be a better ending than what there was. How about that? And there wasn't. I mean, it was a pretty terrible ending, honestly. But I don't know. What do y'all think? Did y'all watch Game of Thrones?
So we didn't watch Game of Thrones because we didn't have whatever channel it was.
HBO. Yeah.
But it was funny because I would have people, I'd walk into these conversations about people who were just talking about this, and they would say, "Oh, I don't think this is a show that a preacher should be watching." So we have some of that, and it was mainly, the nudity.
Yeah.
And I put nudity in there like cursing. If it's in context, I'm okay with it. If it's just doing it for shock value,
right,
and just to do it, again, maybe that's more rectifying. So
HBO is notorious for nudity. They like putting it. I think Tudors is another example of a show, and I have not watched Tudors yet, but it's on my bucket list. But so they do some shock value with that, but I don't think it's really the point of the show, because every episode doesn't have nudity in it. The first season really, may have had some nudity in it on some episodes, but then after that, it kind of go like, honestly, when the actors started becoming so famous, then they started refusing to do it. And when they started refusing to do it, the show just decided, okay, we're just not going to have it anymore. It was that type of thing.
And I think that's actually where I would have a little bit of pushback on it. Is I did watch Tudors as well. I enjoyed that show, but I definitely felt like the first season had a lot more shock value because, there's like, we're HBO and we have to meet a certain quota or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's really what it is, but that's what it feels like to me. And I watched a little bit of Game of Thrones, and I felt like that happened more in the show. Like it was more emphasized more in the show than it was in the books. Like the parts they cut were definitely not those parts in the show part, and they cut other parts of it because they could. But I think what you just said is almost what made me start feeling the most uncomfortable about it, and that's that these people pushed back when they had the chance to,
Mhm.
and that meant that they didn't necessarily have the chance to do that during that first
Yep.
season, and that almost feels a bit exploitative to me. And I don't know. I didn't feel completely comfortable with watching it the same way that I felt reading the books. With the books, I was able to separate myself from it, and when I was seeing actors and people and stuff like that, it felt more. I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't like it as much. I like the books, like the story, think it's great, but I couldn't personally get over that myself.
That's
I
fair.
can see how people could, but
Yep.
that was my hang up on it. And
See, that's where I'm at with The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh,
So-
really? I really like that show.
So yeah, I'm intrigued by it. Like I watched the first season and I think the second season. But I'll tell you where I started thinking, oh my gosh, I was flying cross country and Handmaid's Tale was one of the options. And I was watching it on a plane with my earphones in, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm watching this and there's other people around. And so then I started wondering, well, if I'm uncomfortable watching it when other people are around, maybe I should be more comfortable watching it by myself, you know. So I don't know. So I think I'm gonna have to pick up the books and read it instead of maybe watching it.
Yeah,
But
I would imagine that it would be easier to separate in the books, but it is very dark. I mean, it's a dark dystopian, and I think those are typically hard to watch, just in general. Like Walking Dead, for instance, I loved it the first few seasons. I don't watch it anymore. Like,
is it still going? Seriously,
it's still going, and it crushed all hope for, it's just one disaster after another disaster after another disaster. Like everybody just dies and comes walkers, and like I don't see it doesn't feel like God's in this, and that's where I drew the line. It's like, okay, I think I'm done. I'm just it's not a hopeful journey for me anymore.
Well, that was going to be my question to you was, as followers of Christ, we know that there's hope. And so I think when we're watching things where there's no hope, that should rub us the wrong way.
Yep.
No, I agree. That kind of brought
agree
it back to the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings distinction that I feel like is a little bit different from those. The hope is very present in those.
In both of those,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it acknowledges that there's dark in the world, that there's pain, that good people suffer, because of that. But in the end, there's redemption.
Some of the speeches like from Sam during Lord of the Rings are some of like the most Christian, themed speeches. Yeah.
And it's good overcoming evil.
Absolutely.
Yep. Which I would argue that, I don't know, I would argue wrongly that maybe Game of Thrones had some good overcoming evil, but there was a lot of
yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a lot more. I mean, Jon Snow was the good. Like I feel like he was probably the only good in Game of Thrones.
Ned Stark was once upon a time.
Yeah, but he died really quickly. They killed him off really quickly. Spoilers, but
spoilers. Yeah. It is.
But yeah, and I mean, he made it. Jon Snow made it through the entire.
Spoilers.
Yeah, I'm just spoiling everything. So
hey,
I
we
think
don't have internet at home. We ain't gonna have HBO anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, I meant for anybody listening. But yeah, I understand. So I have an article that I found that's completely related to this discussion, and it's from the Crosswalk, Faith, Spiritual Life. Is anything really secular or Christian? Is the title of it. And I was wanting to read through it. I just thought it would be kind of a good cap on our discussion here. It says, do you continually hear distinction being made between something that is Christian and something that is not? It often sounds like this. I want to work for a Christian organization so I can make a difference. I won't allow secular music in my home. My children are only allowed to read Christian books and materials, so on and so forth. Where did we get the idea that some things like books, movies, professions, fast food are Christian and some are secular? We even expand on the idea to believe that certain nations are Christian and others are secular. Our classifications of inanimate objects as good and evil, and even considering something secular because it doesn't contain God or even have scripture verses in it, is nothing new. This is in the early 1900s. Preacher A.W. Tozer addressed this type of distinction in his book, Man, the Dwelling Place of God. In his chapter called The Secularization of the Sacred, he wrote, "The church today is suffering from the secularization of the sacred. By accepting the world's values, thinking its thoughts, and adopting its ways, we have dimmed the glory that shines overhead. We have not been able to bring earth to judgment of heaven, so we have brought heaven to the judgment of the earth. Pity us, Lord, for we know not what we do." I thought that was an interesting way to put that. That was very poetic.
I would even argue that because where we have divided secular culture and non-secular culture is probably the biggest downfall of the Christian church.
Yep.
And it is the stumbling block for people to becoming followers of Christ.
I
And
completely agree.
when you talk about, well, you can't play that kind of music in church, or you can't say that word in a church, or you can't talk about that subject in church, my question always, or pushback always is, well, where can you? Like, the doors of a church aren't some kind of magical portal that you walk through and cleans everything up.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think somebody preached this past week on the fact that we needed people who were called into teaching and farming, and you need to be Christian in your workplace, wherever that is.
Yep.
Right? That there aren't, quote, Christian professions and non-Christian professions. We are Christians called into a profession.
Yep. We are citizens of heaven, and that means that we should be acting like citizens of heaven here on earth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. N.T. Wright would probably blame this on the Enlightenment and say
I swear I was just about to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. that our ideas of separating God from the world, this is all part of it. Separation of church and state falls right into that thinking.
You don't see the monks in the Middle Ages like separating their work at the monastery from their calling to God type thing. You don't see, like, when Augustine's arguing against some of the Manichaeans, the Gnostics and stuff like that, he doesn't argue that all of these material things are bad, or these clothings, these marriages, things like that are bad. But he's saying that, we can use it for God. And that's because God's creation is everything. He created everything. It can all be used for him some way.
Agreed.
Yep. So reading on just a little bit more, does Christians popularly and incorrectly like to say that those things, habits, practices, activities that have nothing to do with spirituality or Christianity are secular, even down to specific objects being secular, like cards, movies, games, guns, and so on. The error among Christians is believing things of the world or enjoying the things of the world are secular. This has even led to the idea in the last couple of decades that a concern for the environment in order to save the earth is a liberal or secular idea, when Scripture laid that out in Genesis as a command for mankind to be stewards of the earth. And then it says, for the motives, objects in of themselves have no moral or immoral quality. For example, guns are not evil, but rather those who intend to use them for harm. Movies or alcohol or certain types of music in or out of the church are not sin in of themselves. It is in the motivations of our heart. This could be lust that involvement or activities might instill in us, the dependence on substances, or when we place these objects in relation to our love of God that produce sin. Use and intent, not objects, are either moral or immoral. And it talks about 1 Corinthians 10:23, which I believe Bowling already mentioned about, with that Paul talked about the have rights to do everything, but if it's not beneficial, we shouldn't do it. So yeah, it touches on all of that. So I thought that was a pretty good, interesting article.
Good cap on the discussion.
Good cap on the discussion.
Good segue. I felt like that was picked on
Yeah,
purpose.
yeah. Honestly, I didn't know that it talked about games and cards in here.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that will be our segue. Appalachian Liturgy Top 5 Debate. To our top 5. All right. So our top 5 this week is on family board games, which includes cards. We made that decision by popular vote before the podcast.
10 seconds before we started.
Yeah. I just want it on the record that Brooke and I voted in favor of cards, and you, Bowling, did not.
I did. I'm a strict literalist in terms of what a board game is.
All right. So I guess, Brooke, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I have my top 5, and then I have some honorable mentions.
Okay.
So at 5, I have the card game Rook.
No.
You know that's on mine now. I said as soon as you said we could do cards, that's the one that made the list. I'm gonna go ahead and spoil it.
Here, I'm going to go ahead and say that I want nothing to do with Rook, and I want to veto it right now. And here's why. Me and Dustin Keith was in a Rook tournament last year at the local here in Lebanon, and he invited me to be his partner. I think, or I invited myself. I don't remember. And I had no idea how to play it. I had like 2 days to figure out how to play the thing. So I just watched some YouTube videos really quick. I bought a Rook deck, and I went in feeling confident. Like, I'm
of course.
Yeah, like I know how to play board games. This is going to be easy for me. We got destroyed. Like, I was getting made fun of pretty much because I didn't know how to, like, I was just screwing up so much. And in the tournament, they had this rule that if you screwed up, you lost. Like, that's it. You lost the matchup. And I kept losing the matchup for us because I was screwing up.
Didn't you all mess up the very first hand because you didn't realize the Rook was part of trumps or something like that? It was the trump color. And
something like that, yeah. Yeah, something like that.
You watched YouTube videos and you didn't know the Rook was
Okay.
I feel like this may be an unfair reason to discriminate against this card game, but
so I watched YouTube videos, but I also got tips from Bowling and my friend Josh, who told me about rules that we weren't playing with, and that just confused the life out of me. I think it was like
I'll give you that one.
It was what was it? A smaller Rook, or what was it called?
He plays with the baby bird.
Baby birds.
Yeah, it just confused the life out of me, and I
played with ones as 15s, and they did not. Right.
Yeah, so they told me all these additional rules that was not in this, and I had no idea what I was doing.
Maybe before you play a tournament next time, you ought to just play it fun.
Oh, the game itself's broken. It's not anything to do with that.
It's a garbage game. It is a garbage game, and it should be erased.
I
want it canceled. I want to cancel that game.
All right, so number 4 is the game Sorry.
Okay.
Number
3 is a game called Boggle. Do y'all remember Boggle?
Yep.
I think so. Yeah.
I remember playing it at school a lot.
Is it like you press something, right? And
you got a button and it shakes up all the dice that have the letters on them, and then
yeah. Okay.
So kind of like a precursor to Words with Friends and some of those games. So that was 3. 2 is Uno.
Okay.
And 1 is Mexican Train Dominoes.
What?
Never.
I don't know. What are you talking about? What is this? Like, it's a more specific version of dominoes?
Yes. Like, you even have little trains and yeah.
Are
you sure it's not Ticket to Ride?
Positive. It's called, because I even argued with my family that maybe we should call it something else, and they proved to me that it was called Mexican Train Dominoes. Because I thought it would be offensive. But yeah, so like we play it. We bought every new couple in the family, once they get married, they get their own version. They get their own game of Mexican train dominoes, and we play it all the time.
That's great. I've never heard of that, but that's a pretty awesome, like, little family tradition thing.
Yeah. So here are my honorable mentions.
Okay.
Categories.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Monopoly has to be on there somewhere, but it got an honorable mention because when I was growing up, my sister would never finish it because she got mad and would quit, and so
That's how you finish the game.
And then Battleship is an honorable mention, and a game called Seen It.
Yep.
Seen it. Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, it's kind of old now because like you don't do any of that. But then Trivial Pursuit.
Wow.
That's an honorable mention for mine too. We had a lot in common there.
You didn't put Yahtzee on your list.
I know. I love Yahtzee.
Well,
but
let's move to my list because I did, and that's my number 5, Yahtzee. We played this probably as much as we played anything else in my family. My mom loved Yahtzee, so Yahtzee is definitely there. My number 4 was the game Upwards.
yes.
You remember that? It was like better Scrabble.
Yeah, it was Scrabble on steroids.
Yeah. So we played Upwards. Monopoly got number 3 on my list. I think we did finish. Like, I don't think anyone in my family got necessarily mad. Maybe my sister might have. I might have. I don't exactly remember. I wasn't too competitive, but
the rage clouds your memory.
Yeah.
So our youngest daughter, who's now in college, would celebrate every time the power went off from a storm of any kind, and she would run to get the Monopoly board. I mean, the minute, like, you didn't get 10 minutes, you know, we're all like going to get heaters and candles or whatever, and
Monopoly.
she's in the game closet pulling Monopoly out, and it's like Monopoly time.
That's exactly what we did, and that's when we played our most games. Is when the electricity was off. We would have flashlights and candles, and we would be playing Monopoly or something. So that's crazy. That's a pretty typical thing, I guess.
Yep.
All right. So my number 2 is the game Payday. Did you all ever play that?
Yeah.
I have played it, but not a lot.
Yeah, that was probably one of my my favorite board game as a kid was Payday. I'm not sure why. I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember that we played it a lot. Yeah, and I think there was like a lottery in there, so you won a bunch of money. So yeah, it was teaching you about the work week, I guess. And my number 1 is 500 Rummy, and that is my favorite card game still. And that is the game that not only did I play with my family, my parents, but I would play it with my grandparents. I would play it with my grandparents, my great aunt, like so it was my granny's sister. Like we would have just celebrations around that game. And what was crazy is I was in a family of cheaters. So especially like my dad, my grandma, and my great aunt, and then my aunt and uncle. Like when we would play a game, we would play a game, and they would all cheat. Like I was a kid playing it, and they would cheat. Like they would be hiding cards and everything else. Like they would stand up, and cards would fall out from under the seat.
Sounds like our family root games.
That's right.
Yep.
So, and I think that's part of why it's my favorite game. I just have such great memories of that game.
Yeah.
It's just fun, yeah. That's my list. I didn't have any honorable mentions because I think that's literally all we played.
All right. So here's the official list then. Start out with 5 Scrabble. So also like a precursor, word with friends type thing. I thought that was like the official precursor, but go with that one. For 4, I went with Pictionary just because I think that's the more common one. But the one we used to play the most was actually a version that was called Win, Lose, or Draw.
Yes.
Yeah. It was like we had the 1988 version or something like that. And I swear we played it every New Year's Eve at my grandma's.
Box.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the one I used to actually play, but I went for Pictionary to get the more official name. 3, Rook. Absolutely. That's a card game we used to play all the time. It was, we still play it anytime that my family's together. My sister and I will play against my parents, and we'll have like a big, rook tournament between them. Both of our in-laws play, well, Sarah, my wife, and her husband both play it with their families and stuff. So we'll get like large 8-team tournaments, going and stuff on it. And I think it's fun where everybody has their own little house rules. And so trying to adjust to somebody else too is also pretty fun with that.
Dude, our kids growing up were so disappointed because at family gatherings, when they finally got to be old enough to play Rook, everybody else started having kids, and the Rook tournament started kind of going by the
going away.
But they're about ready to come back around. So.
Yeah. And now everybody has their own play styles. Like my dad's mom used to always do this right here to drop little bird seeds so she'd get the rook to fall on her thing. And to number 2, I had to put Monopoly there. That's, like you said, one of the classics, has to be on the list. In terms of cheating, though, this is the one where cheating always happened. When me and Sarah started dating, that was the game we'd play at her house in her basement with her sister and whoever of her friends might be over. And they had a second Monopoly game that I think we dated for 2 or 3 years before I realized existed. But her sister would go upstairs, pull extra money out of that game, and eventually feed it into her hand. And I think it really was. It was years before I caught that she had like stacks of money just sitting underneath her. She would go, "I'll have to go to the bathroom," and then go and leave, pull some money, and then come back, and she'd be in first place. So yeah, that's what I think of Monopoly.
Wow.
And number 1, it's categories. We play it every single time we have a game night, no matter where it's at. With my parents, my wife's parents, my grandma's, anywhere we have a game night, categories is always kind of the most popular.
Interesting.
So have you all played the new Family Feud board game yet?
Mm-mm.
No.
Oh my gosh, I don't know that I've laughed so hard in a long time than when we play Family Feud. It's funny.
I'll have to try it out. I was telling Brooke before we got started that a lot of these games are mostly ones that I kind of played when I was little. My kids are still 8 at the oldest, so they're not really at the age to where they can really get into these, but they're starting to get to where they can understand some of them. So I'm definitely starting to be on the lookout more for ones they can play.
Yeah.
All right, so we need our consolidated list.
Yeah, we do. I feel like Rook's going to make it, and I don't know that I have the power to stop it.
We will rebel.
You don't have enough votes.
Aaron, can I recruit you to vote against Rook?
Who do you think introduced me to Rook?
That's right. I introduced him. So you're going to lose.
I guess I lost. Oh, okay. So Rook, do we want Monopoly? All of us have Monopoly.
I think we had to have
Yeah,
Monopoly.
Monopoly is on all of our lists.
Okay.
Categories made 2 of the 3 lists.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is my number 1 too. What else did you have?
Had Yahtzee, Upwards, Payday, Rummy.
Or Upwards and Scrabble are very similar.
Very close.
We could do that as a combo vote.
Okay. Fine by me.
I could live with Yahtzee too.
I could.
It wasn't on my list, but I think I just forgot about it. Or something.
That's a really good game for you to play with your kids.
Yeah.
It is.
I just want to say that I'm really proud of everybody for not putting the worst board game, the Game of Life, on here. I hate that game more than anything in existence.
I just didn't think about it because we did play Life some. It wasn't my favorite though.
I honestly think I finished 1 game of that in my entire life. I do not like it.
As a kid, this is such a girl thing to be stereotypical. There was a mall game, and you had credit cards. You had real credit cards, and you had a budget, and you rolled the dice, and you could go from store to store. Now, talk about a good sleepover game. That was broken out at every sleepover as a kid.
That's great. Now, if we wanted to talk about modern board games, then I have 10,000 of them that I could talk about alone, I guess.
You have all these games that have like all these rules and take forever. Like,
They do.
45 minutes explaining the rules.
Yeah. It's exhausting sometimes. That's why I try to learn the rules by just watching people play it.
Right.
And then, because, I don't like reading the rule book. It's boring, but
Obviously, when somebody watched YouTube videos and didn't know the rook was the trump card.
you don't learn rules by watching YouTube videos, clearly. Yeah.
What's our last one? Did we put
That
Yahtzee there?
Yahtzee's what I have down. Did we want anything else? Yahtzee
Live
good?
with that.
All right. So that's our top 5: Rook, Monopoly, Categories, Scrabble / Upwards, and Yahtzee.
Like it.
All right. Good stuff. Well, that will conclude. Aaron, thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed our podcast, and please come back. Well, maybe
more talkative next time.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a topic where you can talk pastoral about something for us.
Sure. Sounds good.
All right.
Lead it for
Good
us,
deal.
yeah.
All right. Then thanks, everyone. Peace be with you. And see you in a couple weeks.
Have a good one.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Night.